Right. First, an apology. I seem to have picked up some kind of fatal man flu on the flight over here, and I may have overdone the flu capsules a bit this afternoon. So if I conk out, well, that's why. Okay, couple of disclaimers I must make. First of all, I need to make this clear that this is a presentation about Portsmouth Library. Now, Portsmouth University, the corporate site, is also undergoing a redesign, but we have kind of a peaceful but different coexistence. We use the T4 installation that the whole university uses, but because we're deemed to be different, we've been allowed to go our own way. So what I'm talking about today is very much about the library. And if I can just make it go. There. Okay, so basically we're working with a very small team, me, and but hosted on the corporate web server, and that team, the corporate team, does provide me a lot of support in terms of making things work. One of the slightly different things about the library website, and I suppose this would apply to many libraries, is we've got a lot of integration with third-party services. So we've got, obviously, our library catalogs, and obviously we're also using discovery services, EBSCO, Capita, and a number of other in-house things. And I think if you looked at our website on a sliding scale of between recruitment and teaching and learning, we're much more on the teaching and learning side. We really don't have a lot to do with a lot of the things a corporate website would have to do. We are a research tool, we're a learning tool, and we do a lot of teaching through our website. We do have the benefit of having a captive audience, which is very well defined. We know exactly who our users are. Actually, that's a slightly misused term. I shouldn't have put that down, because some of our audience is actually captive. We do have a distance learning program with a number of prisons, so they really have no choice at all but to use us. Now, I took my post at Portsmouth. I was previously at Southampton. I took my post at Portsmouth sort of at the end of 2010, and like any good red-blooded web person, I immediately instigated a redesign, because that's what we do. At that time, I had in the back of my mind, we've got to do something about mobile. Didn't really know what that meant at that time, but we were going to get the redesign done fast because there's a lot of things that need to be addressed. Then I'd worry about mobile. Meanwhile, about late spring 2012, people at the top started saying, we need a mobile app. And of course, anyone from the UK higher education will know this was largely driven by fees and the fact that we've got to show the kids what they're spending their 9,000 quid on. And an app will solve that. Of course, we have a lengthy explanation saying why you didn't want an app, but what you really wanted was a mobile site of some kind. The other business case behind it was we had recently done major enhancements to our Wi-Fi on campus. So students were able to use their mobile devices much more than hitherto. And we were seeing the growth of use of smartphones and tablets among students. And we could actually, get some real figures on this. Comparing academic year 2011-12 to 2010-11, while we saw desktop use drop by 4.16%, very precise, these are figures off analytics, of course. Mobile had increased by 62%. Didn't have figures for tablet that year, but comparing 12-13, i.e. the last academic year to the previous one, we see although our desktop, thanks to my redesign, had gone up 34%, mobile had increased by 152%, and tablet by 486%. So there's obviously a massive increase in the types of things people are using. This is partly because of the Wi-Fi. Also, so many different tablets are available. Our local bookshop were selling Nooks at the start of term for 59 quid. I mean, you're almost stupid not to buy one at that price. It becomes just another toy. So lots of people using the things, we needed to do something about it. Planning. Now the problem was, we already had a website, nicely redesigned, all working, ready for launch in September 2012. We During that summer, it was largely a process of updating, refreshing content. There was no way we could undertake any further design work at that time. One of the funny things, or I find funny, about a website used in libraries and in teaching is so many of the teaching staff want everything just so. They want to use screenshots, they want to explain everything you click to the students. It seems totally counterintuitive. It doesn't seem the right way to teach a website, but that's what they do. So at this point, sort of midsummer, people had actually done all kinds of handouts with pictures of the website on it to give to their students, and I wasn't allowed to change it at that point. So that was a problem. So we had no time to revisit, redesign. Staff and students are extremely disruptive to any change during term time. I'm surprised how conservative they are. You move something on a page and we will get emails saying, why is this changed? It used to be this way, now I'm confused. And we can't diverge from the prepared materials. In other words, to borrow that old joke about asking directions, you wouldn't want to be starting from here. Yet, we had a commitment. We had to make a response or a web-friendly, mobile-friendly site. So plan A was, okay, go ahead, launch the website on schedule. And this was the original plan, and to follow with a separate version for mobile. Now, this was well documented in T4, how to do it through mirroring, and you have it on a different channel, no problem, reuse your content. So on the plus side, easy to use. It would have minimal, if any, impact on the newly launched website that was out there. This would just be an additional channel. And we could initiate it quickly and develop it in stages. Against that, we have a large amount of material that's outside T4. Okay, so we've got our own branding and add-ons to our third-party services. We've got some specialized tools which we totally in-house written outside T4. So how would we, get those into a mobile channel? That was one problem. I was also worried about this focus on a mobile device, and these days I don't think, what is a mobile device? Phone obviously is a tablet. What if you stick it on a desktop and plug a keyboard into it? Is it still a mobile device? To me, it's a meaningless definition, and I think that's something that's going to change. You have devices of all shapes and sizes, and ultimately, I feared that the mobile site might end up as a poor relation. Would remember to put stuff into the mobile channel. I was concerned about ongoing support overheads. As new devices came up, would we have to keep modifying this channel to work? And so was it future-proof? One of the promises I made to our library staff when we did the last big redesign was that would be our last big bang. Okay? Henceforth, the site had been designed in such a way that we could do a continuous improvement type program, bringing changes as and when needed instead of complete changes. So that was plan A. Then during that summer, I went to a number of conferences and workshops, including T4 here last year. And because of that, I came up with this plan B. Everyone was talking about responsive sites. And that began to interest me. The big plus, well, some of the big pluses were, first of all, it gave you a single version of the site. Okay, one site delivered in different ways. And that, to me, great, low maintenance overhead. And also, I saw how we could take that model and apply it to our non-T4 services as well. So we could do the same type of thing. And I also saw that possibly it's the device agnostic done correctly, and maybe give us some future-proofing. We wouldn't need to worry about the next toy coming down the road because our site would be responsive. The cons, the big one was potential disruption to the newly launched site. Here we are, just launched a new one, and now I'm going to change it. I could hear everyone screaming in the background, not another redesign, that just wasn't going to happen. At the time, I found relatively few relevant real-world examples. There was lots of stuff out there on how to make a responsive site, but none of those sites really mapped very well onto what we were doing. I also saw it would be difficult to phase in. It seemed to be an all or nothing deal. And at the time, it looked difficult. Now, I've revised my view on that, but when I first started looking into this, what I saw were these very complex charts about 16-column fluid designs and things like that. And what I've come to realize is actually there's nothing magic about that. But a lot of people who come up with these things are bloggers, and they've got to have something to fill their blog with. And so I think they tend to make it more complex than it really is. You know, so you get all this kind of mythology around it. But actually, it's not that hard. So we went with plan B. And basically what I want to do is to step you through how we did it. And perhaps the first thing, the most important thing I did was get rid of the old mindset. Now, I've been working with the web since '93, so that's 20 years I've been involved in producing websites. And for 19 of those years, maybe 18, I think probably the ultimate goal for the web designer was get the site to render identically in all browsers. It's almost like a badge of honor. It works in IE, it works in Firefox, and it looks exactly the same. Yay. When you start thinking about mobile phones, that whole concept becomes totally ridiculous. How can it possibly look the same in a mobile phone? And once you realize that, you sort of realize, well, actually, it doesn't have to look the same in anything. You know, it just has to work well in anything. And that, for me, was an important stage to get through. And it does simplify things. You don't need to worry about all these little clever IE kludges you do to make it work exactly the same way. So, step 2. We used a test site to what I was called rationalize the existing T4 site. And what that meant was getting rid of all the things that weren't going to make responsive design work well. Now, I've already mentioned these 16-channel fluid grids. Basically, all a fluid grid means is you've got columns marked with divs, to put it very simply. So what we did was replace all the fixed width elements in the site design with divs. Very simple, which would then be controlled from the style sheet. Now, in an ideal world, I would have started with a clean slate and done it properly, worked out the columns, worked out my channels or gutters and all the rest of it. That just wasn't an option. I had to work with what we had. So basically, and I'll show you a little more what I mean by that, we adapted our current site into a grid-like structure. And in so doing, we actually came up with this kind of sort of a nested grid idea, where all our headers and footers were fully contained within T4 page layouts. And that was one grid. And then inside that grid, we had a second one for content, which was covered by our content types. Now, that gave us quite a bit of flexibility because we were able to use the page layout as the basis of templates for our material, which is held outside T4. So that was a kind of a local requirement. But we could take, basically, we could use our page layouts as headers and footers for our third-party services and our in-house stuff, which saved us a lot of headache. Where possible, we eliminated images. We had been using some in design elements before. They don't work too well with responsive designs, but we don't think we've lost anything, and I'll show you why in a moment. I should point out we opted to stick with HTML4 throughout, because at the time we were running fairly old versions of browsers and we couldn't and still haven't got any definite dates on updates of our browsers in our computing workstations. They're undergoing a whole moving to Windows 7 process, which hasn't quite completed yet. So we decided not to use that. We are using CSS3 in some places, but the core style sheets are CSS2, so it will work on our legacy stuff. So this says a little bit on the nested grids, and as you can see, it's really, the stuff in purple is the headers and footers, the stuff in the middle is the content. There's nothing more clever than that. Those grids aren't actually representative of the grids we actually use, because they depend on what layout or what content we're using. We have, I think, 3-4 different page layouts and maybe half a dozen content types. So having done that, What we then did was created a basic CSS file that replicated the current site, but using new page layouts and content types. In other words, it looked almost the same, but was new code, it was responsive code. And the key things were, we took out all our fixed measurements, replaced them with ends and percentages, and made sure that the CSS file, the core CSS file, provided a decent fallback presentation if media queries were not available on the browser they were using. Yeah, so once we've designed that, we then dropped these new style sheets and our new layouts and our new content over the old stuff. So the site appeared the same to the user, same content was there, but it was now, if you like, responsive ready. Just like all these TVs are 3D ready. Don't necessarily see it, but it's there. No disruption to the existing site, no significant change to the user experience. So that was our pre-responsive site, and that was the responsive site. That's a typical page pulled out of it. There are some slight cosmetic changes. It's because I took advantage of this extra thing to slip in a few improvements that I wanted to do anyway. But that's neither here nor there. This is effectively, if you weren't running a media query supporting browser, this is what you would see. That's the default, as I call it later. And just to look a little bit at what it entailed, I mean, all these arrows point to stuff we stripped out to make the responsive site possible, and largely fixed with tables and images. Images we use to trim off the thing, and the reason we were using images was the old mindset. I wanted those corners to be rounded in ancient versions of IE, and the only way I could do that was by using images. By forgetting about that, I'm left with just one image in the core design. And yeah, I've still got the rounded things if I've got a browser that supports CSS instructions. In an old version of IE, they're just squared off. Is that the end of the world? I don't think so. You know, you live with it. If you don't like it, get another browser. Okay, the next bit was making it responsive. And the key thing here is determining your breakpoints. And that's really saying, well, when is the site going to change? And it's going to move from one mode into the next. And that can involve changes to the size of the elements. Now, the key formula that is key to responsive design, and that's target divided by context is the result, where target is what you desire, context is the environment you're working in, and the result is what you get from that. So, for example, a standard browser, its default base font size is 16 pixel. That's what it works out to. If you want a required font size of 12 pixels, you have to do a little calculation, and you come up with 0.75 EM, or 75%, whichever way you want to work with it. And that formula, once you have that figure then works across all kinds of devices. Okay, so if it's applied to a device that doesn't have a base font of 16, it still comes out the right figure, the right relative figure. The only catch with that is, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a moment, is to be aware of CSS Inheritance. This is a gotcha that got me a couple of times. The other thing the breakpoints might involve is changing where the divs are positioned on the page. Might also involve, sometimes a bit touchy, hiding and revealing divs. What you do have to do is you need to keep a decent default style or presentation without any CSS or JavaScript trickery. Because if someone's coming in with minimal level browser, it's got to work. And you also have to keep in mind some of the funny things that are used for accessibility issues. And you might have someone using a very specialized browser that doesn't support all your cleverness. And identifying the breakpoints found Google Analytics is quite useful. If you know your audience well, you can actually look in Analytics and see what sort of screen sizes, what devices they're using. And that might help you calculate where you want to put breakpoints. There is a lot of trial and error. And the most useful tool I found was a decent pixel ruler, so you can actually measure things on the screen, find out where the breakpoints are occurring, and if they're working where you think they are. Okay, and this is just a little CSS snippet from part of our media queries style sheet, which basically shows you what we're doing. So the first line, we're hiding certain parts of the presentation for that particular display, which is any viewport between 731 pixels and 805 pixels, quite a narrow range, but it just happens that with our design that was a critical breakpoint area. The next thing I do, and this is the inheritance effect I was mentioning before, I set the font size specifically here. I hard set it because I'm now shifting gears, I'm changing this to a smaller font size, and I want everything else on the site to be relative to that. So the rest of the CSS. I will make a note at the bottom that you can use REM as an alternative to EM to measure spaces. REM is basically using EM but always related to the root. The problem with that is not all browsers support it, so you have to wonder, is it worth the risk? Okay, and this is a set of screens showing how the responsive site is working. So that's the sort of the first base level. That's as big as it gets, if you like. Move down a bit, and you can see we're now hiding the right navigation. It's still available because we've got the little essentials menu, but we're using the screen more usefully for content. As we get into a smaller space, we replace our search widget with an icon that points to a search page, reducing the header size. We're also starting to rearrange the layout of the page to suit, and the footer rearranged, and so on until we get down to our sort of a size that would fit on a mobile, where now we've had to get rid of our menus altogether, so we've replaced it with a menu drop-down and instantiated a breadcrumb trail instead so people could see where they were. New footer layout, and so on. So having worked out all the breakpoints, having tested them out, we then created a second CSS file to handle media queries, and all we then had to do to enable our fully responsive site was just add a link to the second file and in the page layouts. I should point out that our conditional execution is all based on viewport width. I don't think that's really good enough. I think you need to be a bit more subtle than that, and we're working on that. Because now, it used to be everything was roughly the same resolution, 96 dpi, 72 dpi. Now with Retina and other stuff coming on stream, we're seeing some extreme changes in resolution. So I think the next update for this is going to be resolution sensitive as well as viewport size sensitive. All this, of course, was done in the background, no disruption to the service, and most of our students were not even aware. There's one problem, I think, as a web person. You kind of get into your head that students are running around testing everything on different devices. They're not. They're using what they've got. All they want to do is work on what they're using. They don't care if it works on something else or not. And then, of course, we applied our design to our non-T4 elements to give a complete structure. So, limitations. I think there's a few things that I'm still not happy with. One thing is, in the way we have done it, there is less flexibility for creating content. Okay, our content types are quite strict. If you want to put an image on a page, it has to be in the image content type, and it's defined where that image will go. We do have a raw code page for special cases, because we've got legacy stuff we've got to carry over. Now, I think you can argue it both ways. I think that lack of flexibility can be seen as a negative. In terms of the website as a whole and presentation to the user, that consistency might be seen as a plus. The reliance on hidden divs, I don't like that as a purist, because what it means, if I'm using my mobile phone, I'm downloading extra code I don't actually need to download. Now, my mitigation is that by removing so much graphical content from the site, I've actually made a net saving in download. So everyone is actually better off. I'm just a little bit annoyed that it's not quite as elegant as it should be. And in our particular site, I do think some of our link areas are too cluttered. Now, the problem is one thing fitting everything onto a mobile screen. There's another thing making it usable, so you can actually touch it with your finger and actually get the link you want and not some other link. Here we're still having some debate because there are powers that be that say you must have these things on your website, you must have this on every web page. I think there's ways around that, but that's an ongoing debate. Yeah, and I think basically the purity of the design we came up with has been compromised by needing it to fit on an existing site. But unfortunately, I think there's very few of us that ever have the opportunity to start from scratch. You are usually adapting something that's gone before. But as I said, we have this process of continuous improvement, so as sections of the web are updated in the natural course, we will be refining and refining. Just a quick point on font sizes, we had some issues with that. Little magic bit of code you kind of need for mobiles, and that's a little bit of metadata. And that's to stop the smartphone shrinking your code, because if you don't have that, a smartphone will try and display, it says this must be a full-size web page, so I'm going to shrink it to fit. So you need to put that in. That's okay. Tablets and desktops, as I've mentioned, I think as well as the screen resolution and the viewport size, and you need to look at the pixel density as well. Because what you need to do is you need to provide optimum reading in all cases. Now, on our viewport-only based solution, what happens is if you shrink the window, you also shrink the font size slightly, which is not necessarily ideal. Okay, in practice, our benefits, well, the site works as well or better than the non-responsive version, and that's because the code is better. We've had to make the code work better. We've had to clear out any plugins, glitches, and things. It's much more reliable. We get an added bonus is improved accessibility support. If we use the browser zoom controls to resize it, everything resizes nicely, and it reshapes itself to fit with the larger font, which is nice. In the old fixed sites, you've got bigger text and everything shoved out the side. It is completely transparent to users. Most people were not aware of any change, and they only just when they try it and go, well, oh, it works now, that's nice. And it is essentially device and software independent. I think we've also had the content of our site has improved because we've actually had to think about what that content was doing, where it appears on the screen, what is its relative importance to everything else. So when you're looking at your screen reshaping, you have to actually think, well, what's going to go above what goes under what? And a lot of thought actually went into, well, how important is this element? Actually, do we need it? And we've simplified the maintenance as a sort of a spin-off of the new design. It would be very easy to deploy a new skin on it, give it a new look. It's greatly simplified. We do have some problems. First of all, we do have to have stricter control with content contributors. We still have some legacy, heavily graphic content on our site that will not work well on mobile. This is just one example page. Basically, it's a bunch of images, and behind that, believe it or not, are huge PowerPoint presentations. Now, we really have to get rid of those. The last thing I want to download on my mobile is a PowerPoint presentation. It is completely non-responsive. That is going to take a long time to change. The person involved in this has spent a lot of effort producing it, and getting her to change it, or even to engage in a change process, will take a while. And that is a point. If you're delivering from mobile, you do have to think about the content you're delivering to a mobile device. There are some training and support issues. One complaint that I've had from teaching staff is it doesn't always look the same. And they really do want to put up on an overhead projector like this in a classroom. They want to say, this is what you do. You click on this, and then you go over there and you click on that. And sometimes, if they're using a low-res projector, it didn't look the same as it did on their desktop. And they get really thrown by that. I'm not sure what the answer is. They'll learn. I hope. I've also had people complain about the fact that they're looking at it on the mobile and they can't make it look like the real website. The real website, they use those very words. What they want, and you have seen this on mobile-only sites where you can click a button and you go to the full-size website. Well, in a responsive site, you don't have that because it's almost counter the intuitive thing. I did find some JavaScript that would allow me to do that, but I haven't put it in yet, and I'm not sure I want to. I also wonder, does the responsive design actually impact on the nature of how we use the web? And for many, many years, the web has become sort of the Swiss Army knife of our internet tool set. Just put it on the web. Doesn't matter what it is, just put it on the web. And I think now, if you're looking at responsive, if you're looking at deploying things to mobile, tablets, other devices, you do need to give a bit more thought about what's appropriate for the web. And so that's really a question. I don't know the answers. Are there practical constraints on what you can or should do with the web? Should you be looking at other methods of delivering some of these odd content types we put out there? Lessons learned. Retrofitting an existing site is definitely more difficult than starting with a clean sheet. If you do have the luxury of doing it, throw the old site away and start again. I think it's a mistake to think in terms of devices, because there's too many. How do you test them all? So I don't think that's possible. I think in terms of viewports and resolutions, it's a better way to go. Get away from the use of graphic files for cosmetic effects. I think we're all doing that anyway, but they're still around. And let the browser do its job. I think for many years we've been making mistakes by forcing an effect or a presentation on a browser that doesn't want to do it that way. Microsoft might not have been still using, they may have been forced to change IE a lot longer if we hadn't bent over backwards to make IE work. We let them get away with their funny way of doing things, and so they didn't change. Of course, CSS is the key to everything. Think of your HTML code as just markers for the CSS to work with. And really, this is Web 101 right back in the beginning. That's what we should have been doing all along, but we didn't. We did trickery and clever things instead. Yeah, and because you're working with this fluid grid and you want the images to work a certain way, you may find you have to use the content types more rigorously in order to get things to always appear the way you want. I just don't have time to go on to that one. I'll leave that one access to the website I was going to tell you about. Conclusions. What I've come down to is basically responsive design is nothing special, apart from the fact you might include some media queries in. But many of you are already doing that anyway with print. Some of us had a print CSS, essentially the same thing. If you have followed good practice on your website, and hand on heart how many of us have, you will need to make minimal changes to make your site responsive. And you will get significant incidental benefits from applying responsive design. Bottom line, I think the message I want to leave you with is really responsive design is no more than good design with a little bit of extra CSS thrown in. But there may be some penalties in your particular environment, as there are in ours. There's limitations of the content types we can use. But I think they're small, and there will be ways of working around those. So that's about it. And if you want to have a look at that URL, remembering that it is separate from the one before the slash. So you might want to have a look at that as well, because they're working on some interesting responsive stuff as well. Okay, thank you.